Hello and welcome to Ideas. Hello and welcome to Ideas with Diana on March 29, 2022. Well, for today's podcast, I'd like to read poetry. It's been a while since I wrote poetry, but I wrote one today based on what I felt what happened with current events. And I actually started this morning because let me show you the outfit that I'm wearing now. Um, Now, the outfit that I'm wearing now is peach and aqua and a red scarf. Well, to some people, they say, well, that's political. That means you're supporting Russia. But let me show you the outfit that I was planning to wear in the morning. This was the outfit I was planning to wear in the morning, but I didn't wear it because um, colors have become so political nowadays, especially colors have become so political nowadays, especially with what's happened in the since February 24th. And I never dressed politically in my life. The reason why I wear the color red, some people say, well, it's because of I have ethnic history of being Polish, Prussian, German. That's not the reason. The reason why I wear red is actually because of a famous Wisconsin governor, um, Governor Dreyfus, Lee Sherman Dreyfus, who was governor from 1978 to about 1986. And the reason I wear this is because he was a friend of my family's. He was a mentor to me when I was a teenager and young adult. Because one question I asked him one time when he was down in Kenosha at a gathering is I said, "Well, is there any way to do social good without it degenerating into violence like what happened in the 60s?" And he said, "Yes, there is. You just have to keep a moral compass, and you just have to remember basically if something doesn't feel right to you, don't do it. Don't be forced, don't be manipulated, don't be gaslighted into doing something." And this helped me many years later because I went there's something I didn't think about was many years later when I started as a medical researcher, um, 1989, I started as a civilian medical researcher, and at that time, there was a little incident in Kuwait that occurred at that time in July, and many of us were following it as to what was going to happen. Eventually, by late December, all of us had to make a choice. We either could continue as medical researchers, but we had to work under a military system, meaning that we couldn't talk about certain things. We couldn't talk about things outside of our group. Many people who work in security circles understand this. And for us, basically, it was really a choice because what happens, we had a choice of walking out, which we get a good recommendation at the next job, or we could stay. But if we stayed, we had agreed to follow, even though we weren't enlisted. Well, I agreed to follow because basically I agreed with the mission. I thought that basically that we were helping the Kuwaiti people and that we needed to help the Kuwaiti people from Saddam Hussein. So I, like many others, supported the mission, and we trusted President Bush and General Schwarzkopf in this. Now, flash forward to 32 years later. Um, we are approaching the same type of situation again now that this dirty war in the Ukraine has gone for over a month, and there are refugees on both sides of the issue. Whether one wishes to report on just the Ukrainian people, or also on the people that are basically on the in the Donbass area, and basically about what happened from 2014 2018. The thing is, this poem I wrote is inspired on that because when the first Gulf War was going on, I remember working and I remember a few people that worked with us that served in Vietnam at that time, and in medical capacity. They told us, oh, please, just be careful not to get pulled in by the 5 o'clock follies, which they meant the 5 o'clock news, because basically in Vietnam, there's a lot of people felt it became one-sided propaganda and other things, and even in the Gulf War, it became that way. Many of us actually bought so many CDs and cassettes. I mean, like this. I actually had an Iowa portable cassette player at the time because basically it was easier to listen to music on a portable cassette player than was a portable CD player because of the skipping. And so what happened was basically when I ride or take the bus home, I'd listen to cassettes, and even at work, I had an Iowa boombox on the side of my research desk because even on the radio station, when you tried to play it, they always would interrupt with the warnings. So, today we bombed this thing. Today we bombed that thing. Today we gained control of this. Today we destroyed X number of munitions, Y number. We captured Z number of people, and it was like basically many of us realized, we're doing our part. But the thing is, it was rather distressing that this had to be solved by war and stuff, but we knew it had to be done, and we did our part. We didn't question. And this poem is about basically there comes a point where even those like during the Vietnam period who actually did their part and actually did it faithfully, actually started to have to ask questions, out of good conscience. And sometimes they're very surprised when they heard need to know, like when I heard my first need to know. This poem is entitled Through the Rabbit Hole Again. I've been through the rabbit hole. First time, part walking fetus, part nerd. Summer of 89. Entering part nerd, exiting late December 89. Military medical research support, half civilian. Sounds like a B movie because a companion to vampire. Still, pre-rabbit hole hobbies, seeing what civilians don't see. Groundness. Runaway Horses had both cassette and CD by Brenda Carlisle. Marquette Science Library and Books Memorial Library. Neural Net Journals, Books on Mantra 2, Vanity Fair, Cosmo, Rolling Stone, Paris Match, Der Spiegel, Iowa Portable Cassette Player, Escaping 5 o'clock Propaganda News. Simulation World, Dream World, escapable then without supplements, late 80s, early 90s. Flash forward, 32 years later. New rabbit hole, using methods 90s, late 80s to escape simulation, propaganda, 5 o'clock world. This time pseudoscience. One portal communication science. Old repackaged 5 o'clock propaganda. Today's spring. Was trying to wear banana yellow jeans with top, changed mind. Don't want to feed the machine again. Late 80s, early 90s. Trusted mission, followed fully. Asked a question. Why need to know? I was a team player. Back from early 90s to 2022. Only second portal is conservative. Oh, outfit. Peach jeans, aqua top, not feeding machine. A machine that makes refugees on both sides. A casual outfit of banana jeans and aqua top, now considered political. Peach and blue, not feeding the propaganda machine. Harder to find all portals of views. Even with internet, there's now a kill switch, not in DC, but in SF Seattle. Who elected the reps of the SF Seattle kill switch? Fini. Now the second poem is another poem, another thing I used to like to do too, at open mic is an impromptu poem. I would think of a topic and just go with it. Like, for example, this is going to be Improptu 2022/1. Impromptu 2022/1. It is 2022, but it seems like a simulation because even when I look through my graduate school post philosophy books, I see something about postmodern ideas of a simulation. Late 80s, early 90s. My knowledge of philosophy was low because during that time, I had a professor who taught philosophical ethics, and I felt basically the class was being pitted against each other and didn't agree with the pitting, didn't agree like the gladiatorial style. So philosophy for many years, basically, I studied by myself and without going to without any university classes because I didn't like how it was taught at the university. When I came into graduate school, I was reintroduced to philosophy, but this time with professors that were one was a Lutheran minister, one was a actual philosopher. However, both of them made me feel and eliminate the hurt and hatred that I have for when I had the philosophy and medical ethics from a professor who was too pitting red ants against black ants. With it, I sort of understood things about a simulation. Now, thinking about simulation, to me, in my life, simulation means two different things. If you were to ask my younger self in the late 80s and 90s what simulation meant, simulation meant that basically lighting a golf game, lighting a basketball game simulated that I played on my TI 99.4, converted to my Osborne 1, and even ran on a mini computer. Now, if you ask my older self what simulation mean, I have to say, well, which simulation do you actually mean? Do you mean the game, or do you mean the philosophy? Even in the 90s, although I didn't understand the philosophy of one French philosopher, postmodern philosopher, that we may be living in a simulation, going down the rabbit hole the first time, I could tell we were living in a simulation because suddenly, basically, things started to change during the first Gulf War. Certain things, basically, it wasn't that you couldn't talk about certain things. It was basically just even certain ideas. I mean, for example, before the first Gulf War, we talked about how research animals were treated, and I was friends with three of the veterinarians that worked in the research section I worked with. All three of them actually quit, and all three of them begged me, said, "Please don't stay, because they said they may try to have you work on the animals, or they may try to pull you in." And the third one I talked with, he told me, he said, and when I heard about how the animals were treated, also how the care the way the animals were tested and the devices like that were out of date, and not really beneficial and sort of careful with the animals, I could see why the three veterinarians couldn't take it as long. And when I did start to get in research, at one point there was one postdoc who did try to say, well, you have too much free time in your lab. You're going to have to do this, do that. Well, what happens, he had more free time than I did because he was waiting for his PCR gel to go down, but he thought it was necessary to tell me that I had too much free time. And at one point said, well, why don't you help us out with the animals? And even though one research I worked for, we sometimes fought like cats and dogs, basically because we both had similar personalities. I'm glad basically he put his foot down and said, no. He said, no, you're staying just in the lab, and I'm glad he did that, because when I did find out about how the animals were treated, it was like I could understand why Peter thought the way they did. And at the time, I had a friend who was with Peter, and she would ask, she'd say, "Well, please, why don't you just quit this such and such? Because you could find another job, you could do this and this and this." And what happened was, at the time, I needed to pay off bills. But basically, I didn't agree with how the animals were treated. I thought that there were better ways to do it. Yet, but basically, I wouldn't betray where the animals were kept, because I knew that some groups, even though they claim they're peaceful, they're very radical to get their means. And so, what does this mean? Is basically, well, back then in the 90s, many of us knew when we were in the simulation world, and when we exited the simulation world. Now, today, basically, the problem that exists with internet communication skills, media and marketing, and how communication skills, the uh, the simulation world and the real world, they found a way how to merge the two. That if you're not careful, you could think that you're over here, but you're actually in the simulation. And that's part of the reason why I don't really watch TV news anymore, because if you watch a news that's from one script, even though it's given on multiple news networks and multiple quote trusted networks, and what's the other word they use now, um, um, other non-biased networks. Another word will come to me, but non-fake networks. Um, but it's all one script. Are you really listening to the news? Are you really listening to the reports? Because basically, even during the first Gulf War, my way to get away from basically the war news, and even just having to think about, with the war going on then, was I bought a few cassette tapes, a few CDs. My favorite cassette tape was Wild Horses by Belinda Carlisle. That really help clear my mind and open my mind from some of the war stuff that we had to work with, and some of the war news that we had to hear like that, and also some things from Paul Abdul and Wilson Phillips. But the point is, basically, we knew how to get out. We could get out of the simulation, as sometimes as a cassette tape, sometimes as a CD, and we could get out of the simulation without supplements. And that nowadays, basically, trying to get out of the simulation. Okay, well, you watch one network, you hear this thing about the war going on. You watch a network, you hear the same script, but basically told it in a modified way. Listen to another one. Now, what happens if you try to listen to someone who's actually saying something that's not following the script, like a conservative news station or even alternative foreign news? Well, up to a certain point, some of the foreign news stations I used to listen quite a bit, because basically they weren't following the script. They were actually doing a job of reporting what you should do. You report what you see, and you report what's going on, whether it's pretty or not, and whether it's objectionable or not to what the party line is. However, again, um, the simulation and the real world merged, and so what happens when reporters from that side? But when you hear all reports from this sideline, you don't hear from this sideline. It really makes it like it's like basically this is a very bad moral play. This side is completely guarded, and we're fighting the evil horde on this side. But then when you hear reports on the other side, about how what has happened and what has been observed, you realize that both sides in a conflict with refugees, there are two types of refugees, and what happens is basically, um, and they actually see and talk with the people in the Donbass area, finally, as to what they felt about their viewpoint. So American news people can hear it on the quote non-fake on our non-fake news stations. And I don't know whether that's gonna how well how much of that's that gonna be broadcast, but I hope it is, because when they listen to people on both sides of this, they'll hear people about who've had their homes bombed. They'll hear people who are refugees. They'll hear people trying to take care of their pets. They're going to hear people about their children trying to go sleep. Um, and what happens, they're going to hear people that feel basically that they're helpless, because basically you have two military units that fighting, and what happens is, again, it's what do the units do when they feel no one else is watching, or someone else can't basically be their opposing neutralizing force. And you'll hear stories of both sides on that, which I've heard, but it's becoming harder to hear those things, because um, before basically in the 90s, we had cable news, and we had cable news that was brave, and also that basically also understood the old issue of journalism. Journalism is not to be popular, it's not to be friendly, it's basically to tell what's going on. It's like playing golf. You play the ball as it lies, and you tell what's going on. Now what happens, we have internet, and a lot of information comes through internet. And at one point during this, first alternative views were coming in, and it was welcome, because basically a lot of internet providers said, okay, well, that's great. We're not going to do like our grandparents did in the 60s of filtering what people should hear, what people should see. But suddenly, basically, certain channels like YouTube, and others started canceling out these links, basically. So when you went to, you saw a message, this link is not available, this broadcast is not available. And even some broadcasters in the UK basically canceled certain alternative news sources even before the government asked them to, because basically they're afraid of this wave. Well, okay, so now we have an internet kill switch. For many years, this was talked about, and many people disagreed with having an internet kill switch, because basically it allows any political group or any political hack in an upper level position to basically filter points of view and actually gaslight or manipulate a population. In this case, what happens? This kill switch was not done in D.C. It was done in Seattle and San Francisco. And like in my last poem, who elected these people in Seattle and San Francisco to be our representatives of internet information? Boy, if my younger self of 32 years ago would have known that Seattle and San Francisco would have acted as a de facto representative tribunal to decide what was to be viewed and what was not to be viewed, we would have made internet far differently than what we did. Starting in 91. We would have done things, and also we would have done other things differently to make sure that there was always a balance of power and deterrence, instead of basically going for the Star Trek model of a one world government. We would have realized that you have to have basically the three. You have to have one, you have two, and three. It's like basically many myths in the Polish culture of the balance of three, or in the Russian culture of the troika, Ukraine culture of the balance of three, and also European Union of the balance of three. But if we would have known about big tech and how they would have become the new pseudo representatives of what information we see, and what information is filtered, we would have made internet far differently, very far different. And maybe it's time we do make an internet. Maybe make it. We'll call it Internet 5, and this time make sure that it's actually is controlled, not by big tech, but it also is managed by people who are elected, and also people that are not controlled by corruption or bribes. I know it sounds pie in the sky, sounds idealistic, but many good ideas do take a high approach, and maybe I think we do need to take that approach again, because The last thing I think about though is um, before going down the rabbit hole in the first Gulf War, there's a time when I had to sign my selective service card, and I was 18, like many people. That time I had to sign it, and my parents were very upset that the day when I had to sign it because they still were afraid that there might be a draft someday. And uh, and the reason why is because they said, well, you're very intelligent and also you know how to shoot. So they'd probably want me to take a high risk mission. And my parents said, no, we want you to be a scientist. We don't want you to have to be called and drafted because some politicians trying to get brownie points to win a re-election. And that's what we learned from it from the 20-year war of Afghanistan. What did we achieve in a horrible pullout? Boy, what a horrible pullout. So the thing is, with this impromptu, um, we've gone down the rabbit hole again. This time, it's not just those of us who are asked to be military contractors; is a whole population now, and we have an internet that is like 1960s radio where it's filtered. We can get certain points of view that are filtered, but we can't get other points of view that basically really would help us make better decisions and help us solve problems. Well, let me know what you think. I'm on Twitter, and I prefer to receive responses on Twitter at Diana1A. Thank you again for listening, and this has been Ideas with Diana Poetry Reading.